So when it comes to rendering this, as usual in Houdini, there are multiple ways. What I want to do in this case is set up a color on those individual spheres here by using another attrib randomize. So I'm going to drag down those few nodes and drop down another attrib randomize, which I'll wire in between here. And immediately you will see I've got those randomized colors. However, I want to be able to dial those in. So in the attrib randomize, I want to tweak my random distribution. And there's one mode that is called 2 values, which allows me to dial in 2 discrete values, which then are randomly assigned to each of those points that are fed in here, onto which we're then copying those spheres, which in turn get colored by the points color. So let's maybe set up one orangey color here, something like that, and more like a blue color in this one here. Something along those lines. Next, let's go up one level by hitting the U key, and we're now back on our OBJ context. So in order to be able to render this, we need a camera and a light. So by control clicking on the camera icon up here, I will create a camera at my current position in the viewport. And when I start tumbling and moving around in this viewport here, you can see we're losing this camera. It's staying at its original position. So let's reselect the camera up here and look through camera 1 again, but this time enable this lock and lock it to the position in our viewport. So when we tumble now, the camera moves with me and with the viewport. In that camera, under the view and render settings and sampling settings, I can set up my render resolution in view here, and also my focal length. I'm always a fan of a longer lens, like an 80mm portrait lens, so let's use that. And also, I'll need some lights to render this. And in my case, I want to make this easy and just use an HDR, so I'll control click on the environment light, which is just going to drop down this env light here. I can select an HDRI, so I'll take this one and select one of those images here. Keep in mind that if you have multiple images with the same name and just an incrementing file number at the end, you have to maybe uncheck show sequences as one entry to be able to select those individual files that you want to select. I'll just take this HDR here, hit accept, and after a short while, it will appear in my viewport here. Maybe let's increase its intensity a tiny bit, so it's a bit brighter, and then set up the rendering. And for that, I'd like to reconfigure this interface here a bit. I'd like to close those tabs here, then pin the tabs that I have here, and then hit Ctrl and T twice to create 2 new tabs here. In the last tab, I'll switch to my out context, and I'm going to drop a mantra node here, which will configure Mantra, Houdini's built-in rendering engine. And in here, under the Rendering tab, I'll set my engine to physically based rendering. There are other methods in Houdini for rendering, some of which have some advantages in special cases over physically based rendering. However, physically based rendering is what I use about 90% of the time, so let's stick with that. So far for now, I want to head to the second tab I created and switch this to the matte context and create materials, shaders, to assign to our geometry here. For now, I'm just going to hit tab and use the classic shader, which is Houdini's Uber shader. And in here, I want to set the base color to be all white. Otherwise, this shader is set up so it automatically evaluates the color we wrote into those spheres to color those. So let's assign the shader to the spheres in the OBJ context, where I'll select the Geo node, go to the Render tab, and in here, hit this button, and in my tree view here, select the classic shader I just created, hit accept. Also, what I want to do is, again, unlock the camera from the viewport, move to the side a bit, and maybe add a background plane. So I'm just going to drop down a grid, which is Houdini's name for a plane, dive in there by double-clicking, hitting I or Enter, setting the plane's orientation to be along the XY axis, like so, and then going up again by hitting U. And now I'll wire this grid down below my camera, so it's now parented to the camera. And then I'm going to move it back, so it sits behind my spheres here, maybe like so. Alright, let's look through our camera 1 again, and let's go to our render view here and hit render. So I sped up the rendering portion up until here, because Mantra, to be honest, is not the fastest render engine out here. And the first thing I'll see in my converging image here is that I want to assign another shader to my background here. So I'm going to stop this, maybe make a screenshot for later. So in here you have a bar that allows you to switch between all those screenshots you've took. Go back to my scene view and go to the materials context and just copy this classic shader and paste it, calling this BG for background. And in here I want to dial back the base color to a dark blue. Something like this, a really dark purplish blue. And again, onto the grid here in the render tab, I want to assign this material. Okay, let's go back to our render view and render again. Alright, that's a bit better. So let's stop this, take a screenshot, and now you can see we're progressing here. However, I think we can do a bit better by tweaking a few things here and there, which we want to do in the next video. If you guys like what we're doing and want to support us, you might want to head over to our Patreon, and we'd like to thank all of our patrons, especially Rafik Anadol, Chris Hebert, Important Looking Pirates, Encore VFX, Patrick Fillion, and Gearbox Studio Quebec. Thanks so much, guys.